Om Indram Mitram Varnamagnir Matarato Divyaha Sasuparna Gurutman Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedantyaagnim Yaman Matari Shvanamahu Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. To that one, indivisible, formless presence, the ancient seers assigned many a noble title, like the friend of all beings, the eternal companion of the gods, the waters of life, the fire of yoga, the divine internal atmospheres, the winged carrier of consciousness, the devourer of death, and the one who shines forth the light. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvavahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidveshovahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, divine reality, protect us. May it sustain the three worlds. May it illumine our thinking consciousness. And may it go deep into us, purify all levels of our awareness. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. And we welcome you here into the midst of SRV associations, exploration of the subject mind as the kingdom of heaven within, in our third class of a 4-class series. And we've all been sticking with it, following the higher reasoning of this process, as opposed to other perspectives that are sometimes offered to us, sometimes even threatening to take our awareness away from the truth. As we were talking about in the very first class, we don't want to think of time just as being linear, past, present, and future, unconnected, but more cyclical or cyclical, so that we know that, as Buddha said, the river returns, and you have to get out on the banks and watch it a while before you realize that. So the witness consciousness is the getting out on the banks of this cycle of phenomena, which goes on and on forever and has many lifetimes in it. And you couldn't have that many lifetimes in the present theory of spiritual evolution, because you haven't been a human that long. So you're not talking about 4,320,000,000 years of lifetimes. You're just talking about a few thousand years of human lifetime. So we were talking about how looking back in time to a phase when we were not in human bodies, that we were apparently in animal bodies. And we are probably to suppose that that can still happen, that there are rebirths in animal forms going on, because some animals show intelligence of a kind, and even insects and plants show some sort of life force and some sort of intelligence to grow in the direction of the sun, or to take shelter from danger and various things. So we probably, as Vedantists and as Buddhists and Sufis and other philosophically oriented thinking darshanas, or ways of proceeding spiritually or religiously, would rather champion this theory, if you want to call it that, that everything comes from the mind and returns to the mind, that these cycles are actually going on in consciousness and intelligence, and the tendency to turn yourself into an individual ego, individuation, and the power to think, maybe think higher than other beings that you find yourself in companionship with on this planet, like horses and cows and insects and things, that the human being has this marvelous facility to plumb the depths of its own consciousness. And maybe the word awareness might be a good word to place in perspective here, because awareness with a capital A, just like we would want to capitalize the word self, so that some philosophical schools wouldn't object to it, thinking it to be the small individual self, but the great self, which is unchanging and all-pervasive. As I just chanted, and that chant that I started off with today is from the Rig Veda, this very ancient, probably oldest of the 4 Vedas, and it starts off citing the gods: Om Indram, Mitram, Varunam, Agni, water, fire, and the god of all gods, the god of the senses. All of these are cited in a couplet that then proceeds to say Ekam Sat Vipar Bahuda Vedanti. So that means they've taken that out of the Rig Veda and just used it as its own saying around the non-dual thinking of India. There's Ekam Sat, one truth, but it manifests in different ways. And or sometimes they like to say that there's one supreme goal and many paths leading to it. However you want to say it, in whatever language that you speak or understand through, the implication and the meaning remains pretty much the same. You wouldn't need to go much further than just to say, there is one truth, and before you uttered the rest of the worlds, the seer would go, that's enough, thank you. All right. The one truth is all I want to hear about and know about. And now let me meditate on that. Ekam Sat. I think I saw a license plate with those words on it once, Ekam Sat. So people, human beings, living beings, embodied beings, have this marvelous facility then of consciousness or awareness, uppercase, we're using that is different than, say, the consciousness with a lowercase, which is just mundane human thinking, cyclic surface thinking, worldliness, as Sri Ramakrishna used to call it, and remaining on the surface where the trivia and the minutiae is. I was at a doctor's office, I think, recently, and saw on the screen there, you see, a trivia game, you see. So the question there was, how many SpaghettiOs are in a box of spaghetti, SpaghettiOs? How many round noodles? Well, I guessed, how about 1,000? It's something like 178 or something. But what a stupid thing, I mean, it's all come to this, that if you're good at trivia, you're considered to be smart, and you can make a lot of money as well on these game shows. But we wish it were turned around so that if you had some philosophical smarts, that they'd give you some philosophical questions, you'd ask them, they'd ask them, you'd answer them, and they'd give you lots of money. See, you could use it for helping others, which is what the spiritual person does with his money or her money, is to help good causes. And it doesn't matter if others are not helping. You yourself have that privilege to give, and you shouldn't be considering whether others are giving or not. This is your destiny, this is your dharma, you're fulfilling it, it's your good karma, and the attachment isn't there, nor is there any, condition that you're placing on it. You're not placing any condition on it, you're just giving because that's what you should do. If you found a worthy cause, which is rare enough, then you can give lavishly to it. Because Sri Ramakrishna used to say, remember, that there are 3 or 4 ways in which a worldly person loses their money. And one was lawyers, because they're involved in court cases all the time, because they have lots of money and involving themselves into lots of activities that some of them don't. Some of them go south, you see, and bring you to court. You're going to need a good lawyer. Another way they lose their money is doctors, because they're eating lavishly rich foods and the organs are giving out and the prana is sapping. So they get sick, and so they have to spend a lot of their money on doctors. And I think one of the other ones was evil children, which I always get a laugh at. We hate to call our children evil, but let's take a look at this, you see, and see how they, as Shankara says in his stotrams there, when you get old, they put you in a room, they don't want to see you anymore. Did they really love you? See? And that's almost a side point. What are you doing in a room thinking about that? You know, you should have probably renounced your family a long time ago, like they did in old India, and made yourself ready for free life, you know, to free yourself from the body, not caring what others think about you, family or not. So there's all these things in which the spiritually oriented person involves himself in. Their thinking process goes to that. So they might as well then, to bring it all around, my usual preview here, to bring it all around to a full circle, they might as well be living in the kingdom of heaven. They don't have to go anywhere to find heaven or go somewhere to be in hell. In fact, it's going to be very hard to find earth for them, the world, because the world doesn't exist for them once they know God. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that the further you go towards the east, the further away you go from the west. Well, he meant the further you go towards Brahman, which is the name for God in our tradition, the further away you go from the world. And you don't have to go far to prove that to yourself. The further you go into your own consciousness tonight in dream, the further away you are from the solid world. And if you go into deep sleep, you're even farther away from thinking in dream about the solid world. So now you're in a formless place, which you're very happy being in, by the way. Deep sleep resuscitates you and heals your diseases and makes you feel good when you wake up, even if it's only for a little while. So you must be touching something very deep in the sushupti state. It's a Sanskrit word I'm going to throw at you. The first Sanskrit word I'll throw at you today is sushupti. It's a formless state of deep sleep, and they've studied it from the witness standpoint, like, oh, I went into it, so I must not be it, because it was a state of my own consciousness. Well, it's the same with the kingdoms of heaven within you. They're parts of your own consciousness, and that consciousness right now happens to be allocated to the mind. Now, we have to step forward really quick so that there won't be any objections from doctors and scientists and so forth that you're talking about the brain. No, we're not talking about the brain. The brain has a certain facility for memory, but not lifetime to lifetime, obviously, because nobody's remembering all the experiences they had in the kingdom of heaven in their previous body. Previous body here means your subtle body. So they're not accounting for the fact that even while you're living in a physical body, you have a subtle body. The physical body is 5 senses and 5 elements, basically. The subtle body is also 5 senses and 5 elements, but they're subtle elements and subtle senses, and they happen to be the sources for the effects called the 5 elements and the 5 senses. Earth, air, fire, water, ether, taste, touch, hearing, seeing, smelling. All of those go directly inward to these subtle elements called tanmatras and subtle senses called subtle senses. So these have profound connections if you do your manana, or your meditation on them. You must think about them, connect them consciously, and as we were talking about in our Zoom satsang yesterday morning, I'm sure all of you were there to see that, or you can look back on it maybe. We were speaking about how we have to take account of these things. Otherwise they just kind of remain random and unconnected. Oh, I'm seeing now, or I put the earphones on, now I'm hearing. See, but you're not connecting the fact that you have 4 other senses that have just been shut down when you turned on your ears. You put your concentration on your ears. Now you're only using your ears, you see, unless you're eating at the same time, which you probably shouldn't do when you're listening to something that you want to get some essence out of. So you're concentrating down to 1 sense. And number 2, that in Dream Tonight, you're also changing all 5 of them out, swapping them. You might as well be going to Indra and saying, here, I've got these 5 gross senses. Can you take them? I want to trade them in for those 5 subtle senses on the shelf there. in your shop, you see. Here, I'll give you these 5 gross senses, you give me the 5 subtle senses, and I'll put these on now, and I'm going to go into dreamland. That's the kingdom of heaven you've just entered. And there's no real admission. You're going to like it. I'm going to say, it doesn't cost you anything. It might take a little bit of practice to swap the gross senses for the subtle senses, but it's quite an experience, and it's quite an experiment for the beginner to think this way, because you're not finding an answer to looking back in time, as evolution theory might propose, to this idea of kingdom of heaven. It's not behind you, and it's not up in space. No matter how far you go, it's just planets up there that are the same as this, only with a few less elements to them. So kingdom of heaven cannot be back in time, and it can't be up in space. It's got to be back within your consciousness. And your mind, not your brain, is that vehicle that is infilled with all these lokas, nadis, akashas, ethers, space. Pick your word, Sanskrit or English, or equivalent of those in other languages, to know that all of these kingdoms of heaven are within you, and they're places of sojourn and rest and peace. Jesus followed it up. They're places of rest, peace, and sojourn. So you're going back in these to get rest, say at the time of death, before you come back out here again if you have to, or you're going back into the kingdom of heavens to sojourn. See, many stories about the Indian rishis who went on sojourn in the kingdoms of heaven and inspected them. So they're not doing that with their physical body. It's not some sort of transformation from flesh to spirit. See, it's much subtler than that. You drop the flesh, you give it up, just like you do at death, only you can do it in deep sleep, or you can do it in meditation, or you can do it in dream. You're doing it naturally all the time anyway, so now you're actually replacing those, but you're aware of how you're doing it. That's the one thing that's different. In the random use of the senses with the elements, you're not aware of how they connect. But you are bringing your awareness forward when you inspect the kingdoms of dream tonight with your third eye open. Let's put it that way. If thine eye be single. So you might have to go from 2 to subtler 2 to the subtlemost 1. You might call that gross, subtle to causal. Because when you have the third eye, you have a kind of causal body. Which causal is just like it sounds. See, it's not sukshma anymore, it's karana, it's the cause of the whole thing. You came out through that third eye, and then you took on all these 24 tattvas, cosmic principles are called, and you give them up when you go back to that third eye, which is this great light here. You see, this is where we left off last week. So maybe talking extempore about it, I should start covering ground in the class, and we should pick up where we left off last time. And so you see this chart, which is nicely titled Apara and Apara. So when you put an A in front of words in Sanskrit, it really means they're opposite in most cases. Like himsa is violence, ahimsa would be non-violence, and satya would be truth, and asatya would be non-truth, and or existence and non-existence, sometimes they say. So these are high, very subtle dualities. There are some dualities that are very base, like happiness and sorrow, or pleasure and pain. Those are things you probably want to do your manana, your thinking about, and lift off them. You say, oh, I think I've had enough of my mind brooding on happiness and sorrow, or on pleasure and pain. See, the father of yoga has a lot of teachings on pleasure and pain as being kleshas, you see. They're impediments, or antaryayas. They're despoilers. These are English words that the yoga commentators have chosen for the Sanskrit equivalents. So you may then want to think about these words and think what they imply, because you're not going to find them at the collegiate level of Western education. You just won't find those words. And you won't even find them, their ideas, so they won't be entertaining those ideas. So you're going to have to go to a different level of teacher to a different level of thinking. So you'd go beyond the aparavidya, which I will take later, because is also what you might call avidya, which is some place you definitely want to stay away from. Those are the kingdoms of hell within you. If you want to trade off words there. But if we want to start at the top of this chart, like we did last week, there's that quote from Valmiki. So let's pick that up from last week. Lower knowledge, taken from books, and conventional religious knowledge gleaned from ordinary scriptures, form two separate hells for beings devoid of higher wisdom. I think I might have even stopped here last week, but said make sure that then you imply that if you have higher wisdom, those two won't be lower hells. They'll be something you can inspect safely from the position of higher wisdom. But if higher wisdom isn't there, they can form a lower place to fall for people and get stuck in. And going on, even intelligent beings writhe in these two states, fixating on wealth, status, and power. Class number 2 we took, or maybe it was number 1, we took Vashisha's teaching of Sankalpa and Vikalpa, and how the three worlds, you see, worlds, heavenly enjoyments and intellectual pursuits kind of form the hells of these three worlds, what you get stuck in, he's saying here. And even intelligent beings will get stuck in them. Then he finishes, therefore you should exert inwardly and swiftly attain to transcendent wisdom, taking refuge in the great self. So if we come from that chart into the transcendent light, let's begin, because I often take this from the ground up. Let's take it this time in a different way, because this is a marvelous chart. You can see the impressionistic artist who put this together for me. I said, would you take a cathedral ceiling and would you put it there in the clouds, and so I can put some assignments on it, some words that I can teach from. And this became a famous nectar cover for our not quite famous journal of non-duality. And so I said, well, let's use that also for a teaching instrument. So here it is, you see, with all the little nooks and crannies in the cathedral, as it were, all with these very important assignments from highest to higher to lower, from bad to good to better to best, as Vivekananda used to say. So if you look at the translucent light of pure conscious awareness, that's what I was just talking about. It's conscious awareness, it's not awareness that's dull, and it's pure, it's not impure. It's Shuddha, not Shuddha, mixed, or Ashuddha, or lower, or impure. So this is a light that they've talked about in all the different religious traditions of the world, for these different luminaries. In India we call them rishis, or you could call them saints and seers and sages and so forth. Luminaries, basically, whose minds, not just brains, because brains might be illumined here, as Valmiki says. You might have some people still writhing in wealth and power as if that were something high, but it's actually a hellish kind of pursuit that you're in. It won't take you to the kingdoms of heaven, nor will it take you beyond the kingdoms of heaven. Because sometimes I repeat my teacher's saying on the podium. He'd say, I'm a Vedantist, I'm not interested in heaven, and I don't want a post-mortem emancipation. I want to realize my freedom right now, here and now. Timeless state. Not just the present moment, but the eternal moment. So past, present, and future are things to look at from a distance, like Lord Shiva does. But if you're a witness of all of them, then you're living in the eternal moment, which isn't the present. It's a very nice teaching on time that you would get from Lord Shiva. So if you're living in a place that's pure awareness, then time has been purified. That's a kind of dross that you got rid of. And space also was a kind of dross that you got rid of. And so was name and form left you. And so did, finally, thank God, karma, called cause and effect. So name, form, time, space, and cause and effect are the 5 components of Maya. Maya is what deludes people, taking causing them to take the unreal for the real, and taking the real to be unreal. You see. So they don't know how the great seers know that the unreal is actually a phantom in your mind. It never did exist. You're bringing it into existence somehow. And the real never ceases to be. That's always what is. So there's no change. So name, form, time, space, and causation, you see, that all bespeaks of parinama, changefulness. But it doesn't bespeak of aparinama, the changeless, eternal, transcendent light of pure conscious awareness. Nicely put there. You could even sing about it, if you will. The Avadhuts sang about it. Nimitam manas chakshuradi pavitrau nirasta kilo pada akasha kalpa ravir lokachesta nimita tadayaha sanicha palabdis swarupohamatmam. Oh, he sings in his 11 verses on, actually 13 verses on the Hasta Amalaka Stotram. This is one of Shankara's marvelous students, Hasta Amalaka, who didn't speak until he was some 12 years old or something, and then Shankara came to town and asked him a question, and this is what he said. I'm not human, I'm not a god, I'm not a being inhabiting celestial realms, I'm not a priest, a warrior, a merchant, or a menial worker, which were the 4 castes of that day. I'm neither monk, householder, hermit, nor wanderer. I am the ever-conscious eternal self. I am that translucent light of pure conscious awareness. First words he ever spoke in his life. Up to that point, everyone in the village and his father and mother thought he was mute. He couldn't speak. There was a defect in his voice and so forth, his physical being. But Shankara only had to ask him, who are you? And he came out with that. So the verse I sang translates, without the sun, no terrestrial actions are possible. Yet the light of timeless awareness allows the sun its moment of glory. That inner radiance, vast and conditionless, illumines the corridors of mind and senses. And that light am I, pure, boundless, attributeless, and free. So that was the second utterance that came out of Hasta Amalaka's mouth. It's become to be known the Hasta Amalaka Stotram. And all of it is profound and non-dual. It's one of those rare things that you can sing that just sticks to the non-dual only. It doesn't speak about the gods or the goddesses or the heavens or any of that. But we are right now focusing in on mind as the kingdom of heaven because we have lost that connection. We think it's somewhere up or somewhere back, if it's at all, or somewhere post-mortem in the future. But we don't know anything about the dynamics that operate it, or how we get there, or how we left there, or how we fell from there, or how we regain it. What to speak of that we're dreaming it all, you see. It's not so much whether or not life and death are real, it's that they're all a dream, you see. You exist, that's your true nature. You are existence, is what he's saying here. And so you have to realize that the Atman never changes. The witness consciousness of all this never changes. It sees the cathedral. See? Like down here, our Western savant Shelley says, the one remains, the many change and pass. Heaven's light forever shines, earth's shadows fly. Life, like a dome of many-colored glass, stains the white radiance of eternity. Beautiful by a Western poet, you see, who had become acquainted with the Upanishads. So basically, this whole thing is a dome of many colored glass, the mind with all its corridors, and the light shines through it and it remains unaffected until it hits the dome of the mind. And when it hits the dome of the mind, those many colored glasses, the finest glass is the Trinity. You see, it's right here, somewhere up there, isn't it? There's the Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And so this pure white light of, call it intelligence with a capital I, or consciousness with a capital C, or awareness with a capital A, when it shines, its rays shine, it hits the cosmic mind first. And that's the highest heaven you could possibly think of. It's not even really seen in India as a heaven, because the heavens are lower. Remember our chart on the 3 lower worlds that we took for our main chart for this series. Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha. Those are considered earth and intermediate heaven and heaven. But these realms of the Trinity are far, far beyond that. Like I say, there would be more a matter of higher chakras that you would be aware of, and more aligned with deep sleep, where formlessness is there. You might call that emptiness in some traditions. And beyond that emptiness, with a capital E again, would be a fullness that's indescribable. And that would be Advaita or Chaitanya. It's also here, I think, Chaitanya. It's Sakshi Chaitanya is witness consciousness. Very high, not even really, it's not a tattva, it's not an insentient thing, it's a very sentient instrument, power of consciousness that's there. With the slightest of all sense of separation from everything. The ego is almost gone, which happens to people who go into samadhis. You see, the samadhis are above it. They lose their witness consciousness. When they come back, like Sri Ramakrishna used to come back out of samadhi, then all of a sudden he'd become aware of people around him, and he couldn't recognize them, couldn't recognize his divine consort, Sharira, couldn't recognize his beloved student, Naren, who was later to become Swami Vivekananda. And you'd have to hand him a glass of water or something, and he'd put his finger in it to bring his mind down to the realm of the 5 elements. And when he came down to the 5 elements, he probably came out through the subtle elements, the tanmatras, and then put those together with the gross elements, and then finally said, oh, now my consciousness is back in the body, as it were, and I can see objects as solid. Before I saw them as particles. I saw them as light before that, you see. So the whole thing is interconnected, and it's just a matter of vibration. We tend to think of it in our scientific age as vibration from the word, because that's the closest thing which intelligent people who may be still writhing in hell of power and invention, thinking that they're finding something new when there's nothing new under the sun, they might be able to understand what we're talking about if they have an experience of visionary dream or conscious deep sleep. Those are possible for people. Sometimes they happen even without doing practice. Sri Ramakrishna used to say even ordinary people sometimes can get samadhi. Comes to them when the conditions are just happen to be right. And he described it like the blue lotus. It'll only open when the sun is directly out on it, and then it'll open. But if the cloud passes in front of the sun, it can't bear not having the sun, and it closes. He was using that metaphor, analogy, to describe samadhi in a more ordinary person who got lucky, as it were, and had this profound dream, or this deep sleep, this aware deep sleep vision, or formless light experience that you've heard people have even on hospital beds and things like that. Oh, I saw God, or so they don't have any way to explain it when they get back here, because they haven't done practice. The beings who have done practice and have tried to awaken themselves consciously to entering into these inner heavens through openings called nadis, those people have a way of describing it to you that's philosophically sound. See, otherwise it's like trying to expect a mute person to describe his first experience of eating ice cream. He cannot utter a thing, but he's delighted. So that experience tends to, rob you of your senses, probably both gross and subtle senses, and takes away the 10 elements, gross and subtle elements, and plunges you into a formless state where you're having this unbelievable experience of bliss, or the peace that passes all understanding, or the non-dual light of awareness. So that's where we're coming down from when conscious beings, if you want to put it in Kundalini speak, leave the crown chakra of 1,000 petals and come down to the 2-petaled lotus of the Agya chakra. And then from there it's a matter of coming down to throat and then heart, you see. And then if you fall, Sri Ramakrishna said, to the 3 lower centers, he said, I don't really want to go there, you see. Those are those Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha worlds to which we say peace, 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 may peace come unto them, because you've got gods and goddesses and demigods and asuras and titans and demons and all sorts of beings, right on down to the warlike human being, fighting for supremacy in these 3 worlds. That's why they're called lower heavens. There's a lot of intensified happiness there, but there's no real bliss. See, the bliss and peace that passes all understanding, to them belong peace and to none else, that we hear in the peace chants and in the Katha Upanishad. Basically, those are reserved for these deeper, purer worlds that are bridges into the translucent light of conscious reality. Like the Upanishad says, that one indivisible Brahman, who is the eternal bridge to immortality, granted to Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva the Vedas, and delivered them to Lord Brahma, and it's actionless, it's indivisible, formless, and divine. And it resembles fire that's consumed its fuel already. See? So they try and explain it with some very abstruse ways of saying to kind of kick your mind off of the old conventional way of thinking. Oh, fire that consumed its fuel dies, doesn't it? No, it went inside, to the cause of fire, which is in your mind. You see, fire is in your mind first, in the kingdom of heaven, before it came out here and became physical fire. Even physical fire holds a certain mystical element to it, you see. Probably more than any other element, fire causes people to sit and stare at it a long time. You can't really stare at the ocean a long time without getting hypnotized in the sense, all the different waves and sparkles and things. But fire draws you in very deep, and it's a very profound element in the Upanishads and in the teachings. So they talk about Agni, the god of fire, and how powerful that is, and so forth. So all this by way of saying that the translucent light of pure conscious awareness is a formless light that's beyond waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. We would assign words like Brahman to it, or Chaitanya, or Atman, and in that way, Hasta Amalaka sings to it. Now, the next step down, you would say, would be Nirbija Samadhi. You see, Nirbija and Sabija is there as you come down the left and right hand columns. Nirbija Samadhi and Sabija Samadhi, also called Savikalpa Samadhi. If you wanted to try and understand that from the standpoint of an Indian seer, then you might have to do it in song like they do. And sing it this way, as Kamalakanta likes to sing it. Kokono Purusha, Kokono Prakriti, Kokono Shunya Rupare, Kokono Purusha, Kokono Prakriti, Kokono Shunya Rupare,
Amalakanta o Baba Babiye Sahaja Paga Olore Shama Bakiyama Kalore Shama Bakiyama Kalore Bakiyama Kalore Shama Bakiyama Kalore.
So he says and sings over and over again, sometimes I see divine reality as Purusha, and sometimes I see it as Prakriti. Other verses he says, sometimes I see it as white, other times black, sometimes red, like fire. So before I really didn't know the secret, but now meditating on this, so I see that it's beyond all colors, and it's beyond male and female, and it's beyond absolute and relative. And so this is why I wonder what divine reality really is. And I'm going to, the facility by which I study it is going to be taken away in the highest samadhi. That's called nirbija samadhi. And then sabija samadhi would be where I begin to become aware of forms, like the metaphor I just used of Sri Ramakrishna coming down from highest consciousness into the body and becoming aware of the five senses again. Now right under that you see Sakshi Chaitanya, and across in the cathedral window Vijnana. So you're having this highest experience of the highest wisdom, that's Vijnana. It would be more on the level of Paravidya, or notice the graph on the left-hand side of this chart, where as the light streams down, you see, the light of intelligence streams down to the world, becomes aware of things and beings who are at a lower level of consciousness. It turns from highest wisdom to relative wisdom, and then to ignorance. So it's a little bit of a measuring graph there that's put there to show you how consciousness gets, as we like to say sometimes, dumbed down from the cosmic to the, or you might say from the transcendent to the cosmic to the relative, or to the individual finally. The individual bits of consciousness, like Shelley says here in his poem, it just turns through shines through the dome of the mind. If that mind is very narrow and not in recognition, has not taken stock of, as we were saying earlier, of this, the dynamics of how consciousness can move through different states and different worlds, then it's going to have a very limited experience of that light in the body. It'll run after glimmers of consciousness, sort of like a bird being attracted to glimmers on the surface of a lake, or a fish being attracted to the shining lure that's spinning underwater. It'll focus in on that, and to its detriment, or sometimes to its death. There's a beautiful song by Ramprasad, Kamalakanta sort of, and Ramprasad very much the same, singing in Bengali, that says, "Oh mind, quick, dive deep. You're staying at the surface of consciousness, the lake of consciousness, where death is granted its fishing grounds. Quick, dive deep, so when death casts its net, it will not be able to ensnare you." So if you're attracted to the surface lights, the fish comes to the surface, and then the fisherman or the kite, as you can see it, and dive and grab it. So the song warns the soul not to remain on the surface of consciousness, but to dive deep always and escape death's net. Even at the end of your life, death won't find you. It's not just that, it's not that death is everyone's lot. It's that rebirth is everyone's lot. You see, death never happens. It's just a change of consciousness, like dreaming and deep sleep is. So if you're living a limited life, then you'll have a limited death kind of idea. And that's what Jesus told people too. He said, you must, if you love life, then you're going to suffer. You must actually hate life and love eternal life. So he made a definite discrimination between those two, like bedrock and sand. Those teachings were pertinent on a spiritual level, not just on a worldly level, or even just a metaphorical level. They're actually things to be inspected inside of your own consciousness. So the best way to inspect that would be sakshi chaitanya. You must develop witness consciousness. And usually before witness consciousness comes to you, you have gone through some maybe 10 or 12 different levels of detachment. I mean, the seers have mapped this out in the discriminating person, is that they've actually gone from meek or mild detachment. There are 3 stages of that. It's called mridu. To 3 or 4 intermediate stages of detachment called madhya, and then to some 3 or 4 more higher stages of detachment, which are supreme. Tivya vairagya and para vairagya. So by the time you've arrived through these stages of detachment from what? From the unreal, from the worlds, from name and form, time, space and causality, from the ego, even probably from beyond the Trinity, beyond any form, then you're probably ready to dawn upon yourself as the possessor of Sakshi Chaitanya. It's a very high level of ego or non-ego. In fact, Lord Vashishta used to talk about it, 3 kinds of ego. One's deha hamkara, ego of the body, and one's saksha hamkara, ego of the spirit, of seeing spiritual things, and then paramahamkara, no ego at all, where you've transcended. So saksha hamkara is placed at a very high level. That sakshi is a very powerful word that we need to mananaur, think about in Sanskrit again. Just a word like that, like Maya would be more involved, but sakshi is not that involved. It's just telling you that you can develop a witness consciousness. If you were able to do that, then you could detach yourself from all sorts of problems. We went into the hospital the other day, and in the hospital were people just sitting around moaning, suffering, being pumped with different kinds of liquids and fed medicines, and hooked up to machines that beeped, as we say, and and just pretty much accepting that they're sick. And I was thinking, from the yogic standpoint, that's not acceptable. I'm not sick, and I won't die. And that's from a person who's used to living from a very early age in a yogic lifestyle. It's just completely different than a conventional lifestyle, the way people think about that. These souls that are yogic in nature are not brooding. They're not fearful. They're not all wrapped up in this healing modality or that healing modality, or if I'm going to die, or fear, or anything around it. They're just healing themselves all the time with every breath, because prana is the healer. I mean, a medicine that could help the prana flow, I might sit up and take interest in that. You see? If somebody invented it, oh, I got a pill here, it'll help your prana flow again, but nobody's walking up and saying that to you, you see. So I've got a pill here that will anesthetize you. It'll turn off your mind, it'll dull your senses, it'll dull your pain, but it won't do anything to help heal you, you see. It won't open the nadis, where the prana is flowing inside, here. It won't introduce you to the higher phases of your own consciousness. So if there was a pill that wakens your prana, let's try it, you see. In the meantime, the only way you have to awaken your prana primarily is to breathe. And it's what they're not doing in hospitals. And when they're taking pills and so forth. They're letting something else do it for them. So just as an example of something that is seen out there, you have to use your mind to heal yourself in yoga. And your senses will follow your mind, but if your mind is weak, the senses will take over and they'll fall to the objects. But you are neither objects nor senses. You're not even the mind. That's what Hasta Amalaka just said. I'm none of those things. I'm not a wayfarer or a monk, or I'm not a householder nor a merchant. I'm pure conscious awareness. I'm the light of intelligence of the mind. So that's really what this beam going down the middle of the chart is all about. And you can see its first doorway is Om. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. And so consciousness will stream down. We would allocate that to the third eye. Although Om is first heard at the heart, maybe even beginning to be heard at the third chakra as beings graduate higher heaven to the realm of the Trinity and so forth, to the higher chakras. But Om is heard sometimes by beings right down here on earth. I know I heard it in the crib. I told people that once in a while, and then through my teens and into my 20s, I was always aware of that deep hum that would sometimes become more pronounced and sometimes fade back. And then I read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. He said, if you hear that, follow it to its source. Meditate on it. Try and grab a hold of it. Follow it inward. And that's what you're doing. You're going to the kingdom of heaven by going inward, with your mind as the porthole, and with your intelligence as the impetus, and with your ripened ego as your incentive. You're moving inside to a deeper level of your own consciousness. If you do that enough consciously, then you open the doorway to the kingdom of heaven, and you can go up and down the amber stairs of birth and death all the time. Or Sri Aurobindo said that. Or you can do as Dalai Lama, come back 12, 13, 14 times, like Karmapa has done, and it's no big thing taking on and giving up bodies. Krishna says that in the Gita. Like children outgrow clothes, the great seer will outgrow bodies and give them up and take on new bodies as he needs them. So all of this is the powers of a yogi, and it's the option you have for alternative lifestyles that will open up yoga or union with Brahman again to be not just a possibility but a probability. Not just a probability but an actual reality, like Hasta Amalaka is singing about it. So all of this kind of is a running commentary on all these upper windows of this beautiful cathedral of the mind. It's got its very high level, it's very close to the transcendent light. And so nirbija samadhi, sabija samadhi, higher wisdom. Vijnana is wisdom that usually comes to a person after they've had samadhi. And so it's what they're left with if they come back to the body, is this taste of higher wisdom. It's a nectar kind of thing. It's like amritam. It's a nectar-like wisdom. And sabija samadhi would be seated samadhis that you can have inside of vijnana. See? So a lot of these beings, you can't really look at them and say, oh, they're just living in the body, they're just living in the world, or they're in heaven or hell or earth. You can't really assign those modalities or echelons to them. You just have to say that they're always living at these higher levels of awareness, and their consciousness just doesn't fall down very far. In fact, it would only come down if it needed to help you. See, if it were compelled by compassion. And so that's the next assignment here. You see, Matri Avatar, Kali Avatar. And I put the beautiful faces of Sri Sharda Devi and Sri Ramakrishna, who are the Sita and Rama of this age, or the Radha and Krishna of this age, there in those two windows. See, right near Om and right at the level of Sabija Samadhi, you'll find these great beings. And they would sing about them and have sung about them from time out of mind.
Paramaguru Sri Ramakrishna, Paramaguru Sri Ramakrishna, Laho Pranam Namaskar. Paramaguru Sri Ramakrishna, Paramahamsa Sri Ramakrishna, Matri Bhakta Yugavatar. And beautiful verses like that written by one of Sri Ramakrishna's devotees. So you can see right there, Paramaguru Sri Ramakrishna is the Kali avatar, and she's the Matri avatar, Sri Sharda Devi. So those assignments are put next to these two great beings, who would be the highest form that the human mind could conceive of before going into a formless samadhi type of experience. That's why millions of people are now meditating upon them. 5-6 million people that we know of. And some people who maybe even haven't joined the great movement called the Ramakrishna Order, meditating on them in their deepest contemplations. And holding those forms as sacrosanct and to being the highest. And that's why across the board you'd say here, they're pretty much aligned with the Trinity, because out of the Trinity come the avatars of Vishnu and the avatars of Shiva and so forth. And those also would be very worthy of being meditated upon. So that's why you would sing something like that. Akanda mandalakaram yaptam yena characharam tatpadam darshitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave namaha agyana timvirandasya jnana jana shalakaya chakshurun militam yena tasmai Shri Gurave namaha. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurur Eva Param Brahma, tasmai Shri Gurave namaha, tasmai Shri Gurave namaha. Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Jnanamurtam. You go on singing these beautiful verses from the Guru Stotram that all have to do with Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, which is Lord Shiva. That's called the Guru Stotram, or hymn to God as the Guru. So you're beginning to get into levels of form here as streaming particles of intelligence begin to, well, how would you say it, thicken or intensify to a more moderate vibration, or maybe you could even say de-intensify, because there was no vibration at the conscious level of awareness. It just was still, Buddha says, like the highest mountain lake that the swans can find, just absolutely placid and peaceful all around, no interruptions, the peace that passeth all understanding. Other than that, you know, you're coming down to lower levels of that paradise, the jeweled castle of paradise of the Muslims, or the kingdoms of heaven, which are within you, of the Christians, and so forth. All of these are becoming more readily accessible and cognizable to your causal and subtle senses. And you yourself are taking on more dimensions of form, becoming more aware of the fields of the Lord, and you maybe want to play within them. You see? And we would call this level more correlated with dreaming. See, and deep sleep here, you see, and then samadhi further, deeper inside. So if you want to assign them to a three-world dimension, advaitically, then you're looking at what's called jagad, swapna, sushupti, and turiya. Turiya being the fourth, just inexpressible. They could just had to assign it a number, not a name. And then if you came out of turiya to sushupti, then you'd be in that deep sleep formless state where all the seeds for all of this are. You see, seeded samadhi, right? Sabija means, bija means seed, and sa means with. So you have your seeded samadhis there, some 8 or 10 of them, according to the father of yoga, and you're using that samadhi to cognize objects, worlds and objects in them, and living beings in them too. You're walking the skies, as Lord Vashishta used to say, and becoming aware of other souls who are doing the same. Just like we can go out here outside and walk down to Waimea town there, past people on the road, you see. If Sri Ramakrishna did that, he'd be seeing people in heaven, you see. He'd be in a kind of heavenly state and seeing gods and goddesses walk by. Because his consciousness was so refined, you see. But if your consciousness is very mundane, then you're just seeing a bunch of problems walk by, or dangers, and you have fears and doubts. You have to protect yourself. There's them and there's us. Or there's that and there's me. So your consciousness has become very rough and coarse and worldly and gross vibration. It's vibrating at a very gross level, like probably until you go into a hospital and see it maybe even in a worse condition, or fall into one of the lower hells. There's supposed to be 7 patalas that fall. We'll get to that. This chart pretty much is the best of all describers of the kingdom of heaven within you, plus the one that I created at the first, for the first class that we looked at. That was pretty much a review of the 3 Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha worlds, concentrating more on that. But this really holds almost all 7 of them. And we know that that's a system that's in the Vedic system. It's also a system in the Kundalini system. And it's utilized by yoga and by Tantra as well. They've even fleshed it out with the tattvas, which tattvas go with which worlds. And Shaivism even came along later and added another 12 to the 24. So it's been this really marvelous look at the kingdoms of heaven within you and what it really means. And it's esoteric knowledge today simply because we're not taking account of it. We're not studying it. It's almost not even a matter of belief, it's a matter of experience, as anything would be that you want to prove to yourself. You actually have to go into meditation or go into deep sleep or go into your mantra practice or go into your manana with a different perspective of mind than you would walking out in the world. You see, well, I'm going to work today, or I'm going to see my family, my extended family, or I'm flying to another country, or whatever it is that you're doing. You're going to have to make this a special visitation to a whole level of your consciousness that you've possibly forgotten or just not taking account of. Maybe the connections won't be that hard for you to make once you start into it. But what's keeping you from making that start would be these kleshas, or these antaryayas, or these blockages. And you need to disprove them, open them up. And I've seen people in my own lifetime do this, some in a very big way. I've seen people who have already done it, too, in a very big way, and looked on in amazement at what they've accomplished inwardly. Because the fruits of heaven aren't something that accumulate outward, Jesus said. You store them up in heaven. So they might not show out here. So let's move on toward the break as we come down past the Kali Avatar and we see the Nityasiddha. So that was my good, and Jagadguru, that was my great opportunity in those windows to put images of Swami Vivekananda with his turban there standing sideways in a recent picture they found of him, headshot there, and Jagadguru Swami Brahmananda, Kalindi Fulakama Kamale Madhavena Kridarata Brahmananda Nabastubhyam Sadguru Lokanayaka. They have a verse written for him in the Ramakrishna order, he's sporting with Sri Krishna on the Kalindi River in a full-blown lotus flower. That's a world they're talking about. So then they call him Sadguru Loka Nayaka. Sadguru is the world teacher. Loka is this great world inside. And so he's the teacher of all the worlds, all 7 worlds. Just like Vivekananda is a Nityasiddha, also has the ability, because Sri Ramakrishna said he is the first rishi of the 7 rishis that presides over the 7 worlds. We looked at a couple weeks ago, Bur, Bhuva, Swaha, Mahar, Janaha, and Tapaha, and Satya, lokas. Those 7, which could easily be aligned to the 7 chakras of Kundalini. So all of this has been contemplated by India and laid forth from time out of mind. And it's not that hard to bring back, unless you believe unless you believe in foreign religions. See, if you X that saying out of your vocabulary and just believe in the oneness of all religion, Sanatana Dharma, the eternal religion, and go to a long-lived system like this, then it doesn't matter what country or what faith or what language you speak, you can do this inner journey. You see, you can accomplish this inner journey. Sometimes they call it the adventure of consciousness. You see. Out here I'm engaging in the adventure of unconsciousness. You see. But there's also the adventure of consciousness, your own. And you just have to be willing to trade off a few things to the gods, you see. Here, Indra, take these 5 outer senses, give me 5 inner ones. I want to develop them now in my life. See? And then I can go beyond the gods, get into these higher states like they did. So, I mean, if you talk about, for instance, Swami Vivekananda there, because we always love to sing about him. When you would sing something like this, Haridas chestitai kalagyo gayanai parigyanar buddho maharshi darshanai yatindro shakti bir bhavanyam nastikim Viveka nandate prabhati pranjalihi Narendra shashave Narendra yovane Yarendra kridane Narendra shikshane Narendra palane Narendra yarpane Viveka nandate prabhate pranjalihi Viveka nandate prabhate pranjalihi. Yes, look on the SRV YouTube to get the full hymn. This is called Vivekanandate Prabhate Pranjalihi Stotram, and written by a Swami who I think is still living, and a Sanskrit scholar and expert. So he says in this verse, which is a verse that explains the world teacher, or the Nitya Siddha. Nitya means perfection, and Siddha means, Siddha means perfection, Nitya means eternally. So the eternally perfect soul who comes down like riding these rays of pure intelligence, and keeps his intelligence all the way till he gets to the world. Some souls can't do that. They will lose bits of their awareness of the higher worlds, and most souls will lose all awareness of those worlds until they don't believe in them anymore. That's mithya, is you're falling into a level of avidya. Yeah. So anyway, this beautiful verse that I selected of these 13 verses says, "Hail Vivekananda, all excellences abide in thee. Your heroic actions remind us of Hanuman. Your unrivaled detachment marks you as a supreme renunciate. Your music and poetry blend artistry with heartfelt devotion. Your infinite wisdom reflects the state of a vijnani." So there's vijnana right there. "Profound inner visions mark you as a great rishi." So just go on and on listing his excellences, which he showed us in his lifetime of 39 years here in the late 1800s into the early 1900s, when he even came here to America, and I think became our first patron saint. We needed a soul to look upon as in America and probably Europe as being something that is not only of the highest exemplar, but is connected to the supreme Matri Avatar, the avatar of this age, Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. So this explains then this next tier, you might say, of the kingdom of heaven within us. This is, of course, beyond the word heaven. It's something that's a loka of the most causal kind. You might see, whereas happiness is what they're seeking here in this world, bliss is what they have in that world. It's unalloyed, it's not mixed with anything, and it's uninterrupted. Word for that in Sanskrit is ananda. So Vivekananda, Brahmananda. The bliss of Brahman, Brahmananda. Vivekananda, the bliss of the highest spiritual detachment or discrimination between what is real and what is not real. That's how they came to show us the import of those things. Now, if you come down a step from that tier, and we see there the next entry is yukti, and might as well take that which is below it to shruti. So you see now shruti, yukti, and anubhava stack themselves right under the under and around the great souls of SRV. You're here now in the SRV channel, and you can find us with Advaita Academy. You can find us with our own SRV YouTube and our classes. SRV stands for Sharira Ramakrishna Vivekananda, and also spells serve. So we are serving you up a heap and helping of vijnanam, of the highest nature, and the dharma that comes with it. But we're getting to that. Consciousness hasn't slimmed itself down or de-intensified itself enough to get to the teachings. The teachings are not worthy of the same stage as vijnana. That's realization you're talking about. So the teachings, if you have fallen out of recognition of the teachings, are something that dharma, which will get you back. If you've fallen as low as adharma, then it's going to be you're going to be called upon to avail yourself of dharma. Remember, morality comes first. So this is how things de-intensify, how intelligence, and consciousness, although they stay the same, get conditioned by the kanchukas, or by the upadis, or by the koshas, or by the tattvas, by the names and forms in time and space, as time and space becomes more and more real. So, yet they stay the same in their essence, you see, which is why right now beings living here can waken up to the highest reality. Which is why teachers here say, you're higher than the gods in the Indian tradition. And by essence, you're higher than the gods, because you don't have to be limited to the level of the gods. You see, you can immediately get your enlightenment now, like my teacher used to say. I'm not interested in a post-mortem emancipation. I want in Jivan Mukta enlightenment right now, because that's my heritage, you see. That's what I inherited from the Divine Mother. Now, we don't want to leave her behind, because she's also on the chart, but we'll get to her after the break, which I think is coming up in a few minutes. But let's look then in the remaining few minutes back to the left-hand side of the chart. Right there under Holy Mother and Swami Vivekananda, you see Shruti, Yukti, and Anubhava. Another way of saying that is Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. We just had a big retreat upon that here in Hawaii up at our Badrinath Center a few weeks back. And so we know Shruti, or Shravana, is that necessity that you hear the teachings. So you can look right across from Yukti and you can find Dharma. So you have to hear it, and you have to reason about it, and you have to contemplate it. That would be Yukti and Manana. You see, Yukti and Manana would be that two different words for the same thing. You're going to have to hear the teachings, Shruti, and then dive into them, take them apart from the standpoint of the words, the sentences, the slokas, and the sutras of yoga, Vedanta, the suras of the Quran, all of the different teachings of Buddhism and Vedanta and Jainism and the different darshanas in India, both Astika and Nastika, both Orthodox and unorthodox, have profound things to offer, like Tantra would have a lot to offer if you explore them. But so the idea there is to hear them from, so say you're born in the body here on earth. See, there's a light part of the earth and a dark part of the earth. We'll get to that after the break. But you're going to want to be born here and immediately start writhing as if you're in hell. Immediately start questioning, what people are accepting to be real here. See? Not what they worship here. It's not what they worship here. It's not what they worship here. Should be going on in your mind, like one of the verses in the Katha Upanishad that repeats many times. Not that which people worship here. So, what is, what are the things that people worship there? See? And what is the difference between this and that with a capital T? This would be Viveka. See, and you would get to it like a Vivekananda would by hearing and questioning about it. So they say that souls that already remember their past lifetimes and they come into their latest birth, the first thing they'll do is look for their guru and get initiated, because their body has to be purified in order for them to seek truth in higher places of this world, like holy company, sangha, sadhu satsanga. So immediately they want to get the mantras so their body's purified, so they can move through barriers and place themselves in the company of the holy, because there are holy beings here on this planet. Of course, there are a lot of who are pretending to be holy too. So your Sakshi Chaitanya, your Viveka, is going to have to be honed so you can see the difference between the real and the unreal. Or, as Sri Ramakrishna used to put it, you need to be a jeweler to recognize the value of a diamond. So if you're looking for that diamond who is the teacher, the mantri guru who can give you the mantra that's valid, that comes from a tradition, can confer it upon you so that you have a guru, then you have a parama guru, and you have a parapara guru. See? And you can trace it back to a lineage. That's best. And then your faith will be intact, and you'll have built your house on rock and not on sand. It won't change on you, and it will give you everything you need to find Shruti, Yukti, and Anubhava, which is a triputi in India. Anubhava means direct spiritual experience. So you'll find yourself through your mantri guru to a world teacher, and that world teacher, whether he's in the body or not, will awaken in you this triputi of hearing, reasoning, and realizing. See? And that, you might say, is the key practice to Vedanta. Vedanta isn't really known for practice. Yoga is known for practice. So you might want to take up some yogic practices if you feel you need them, or if your teacher says you need them. Also tantric practices. But as far as Vedanta is concerned, it's all in the mind, just like all these worlds are. And so what you need to do is find the mind's powers. So we know what yoga thinks about the mind's powers, but what Vedanta thinks about the mind's powers is subtler. Vedanta is proceeding more along the track that you already are pure and perfect. You just don't know it. Yoga is proceeding along the track of, we need to awaken you up. You're sleeping, and so we need to give you a practice, and so you may have to rely on the practice for a while to prove to yourself that you are Nityasiddha, that your true nature is Atman. And so that's why we say sometimes Vedanta is just like cuts you right at the throat, you see. That is probably body, prana, and all those things fall lower. You probably should know you're not those already. Vedanta just wants to take the head and fill it with this light. You see, just like looking at a beautiful sunrise. You see, you fill it with this original light, and all things unworthy will disappear. This darkness of the world will disappear. So, by way of saying then, Shruti, Yukti, and Anubhava is a kind of practice that you might find in Vedanta. Probably the sadhana chatushtaya, if you know what I mean by that, is another resemblance of a practice in Vedanta, which means discrimination, detachment, and then the six jewels and faith, or desire for freedom. Faith that leads to desire for freedom is another kind of package in Vedanta you find. It's called sadhana, which is spiritual practice, chatushtaya, fourfold. So it's got these four jewels inside of this one treasure chest. And that's another great Vedantic practice that you'll have. But these two practices, sadhana chatushtaya and shruti yukti anubhava triputi, are all mental practices. You won't have to go anywhere. You're probably better off not going anywhere. Just go inside, learn about them, and apply them, and remember your true nature. That's a good place to actually stop for our break. And we'll go on with the rest of this darker news, where consciousness, the streaming intelligent particles, get covered more and more as it reaches Bur, Loka, after the break. So thank you for your kind attentions.